listeners of Illusion. I'm sitting here zooming with the one and only Jason Karl. Jason, formerly known as Julian Smith, is a television presenter, actor and creative producer, but to us he'll always be the Dungeoneer of the second team to ever beat the challenge and conquer the Nightmare Dungeon. So Jason, how are you today?
Hello, I'm really excited to be talking about Nightmare. I'm still a huge fan of the show, even all these years later. And yeah, it's wonderful to be going down memory lane.
Awesome. It's kind of crazy how many people still remember it, actually. We started this.
It is unusual. I mean, I don't know, because there aren't any other shows that I'm particularly a fan of, but it does seem to have a huge fan base, even 30 years after, you know, it finished in 1992, was it? Or 4? I can't remember exactly when.
94, I think.
94, very long time ago, and the 90s, as they are known. I can tell you how I know that, because I'm good friends with David Rowe, who designed the Nightmare Rooms, and he told me not long ago that Tim and Sue referred to the fans of the show as nighties, so I think we should be calling them that, and I'm definitely one of them.
Just going to carry on with the questions, if you don't mind. We're going to start off with one from Patreon supporter David N. Rabbit, who would like to know how you applied and what the audition process was like.
Well, I can remember watching the first series of Nightmare and loving it. I was also a fan of things like the Fighting Fantasy game books, where you turn to a different page if you want to turn left, turn to page 24, etc., etc. They were very popular at the time, so I was a big fan of Nightmare because it was similar to those books. And at the end of the series, or it might have been later on CITV, but at some point I saw an advertisement saying, if you'd like to apply to be on the next series, apply. So I got together with 3 of my friends from school, Becca, Vaughan and Mary, and we applied. And in order to make our application stand out, because we presumed they would probably have many thousands of applications, we created a scroll. So our letter application was like a painted scroll done in very old-fashioned calligraphy, which I was into at the time, with calligraphic pens, ink pens. And we made it into a very old scroll, and we put a ribbon on it and made it something that you would notice as opposed to simply a letter, and that worked. And we were invited for an audition, and our audition took place in a hotel in Oxford. And I remember the audition well. Before the audition, on the day, we watched a videotape which I'd recorded of all the first series. So all 4 of us sat down and watched the entire first series before our audition in the afternoon. And at the audition was the director and the production assistant, Suzanne Duncanson, and the director, Sally. And we had to do various things, including walk around the room blindfold around various chairs in this hotel conference room, and answer lots of questions about the show, I suppose, to prove that we'd watched it and understood it. And then we played a sort of adventure where they told us that where we were and what was happening, and we had to respond to say what we would do. And that was it, really. It wasn't that difficult. It wasn't that intimidating. It was good fun. And yeah, we were selected.
Awesome. So for your scroll, did you use the old tea-stained manuscript type?
I think, if I remember rightly, I think I used paint. I think I used coloured paints, watercolour, and a calligraphy pen to write this old-fashioned writing, and it was done on cardboard and cut out with burned edges. That's how I remember it. I don't have a record of it, unfortunately. I didn't take a picture of it, but I remember making it.
They were obviously impressed. Did they bring it up at all when you spoke to them at the audition?
They didn't mention that. No, I don't remember that being mentioned at all in the casting, the audition. But it obviously works, because we did get invited to the audition.
So I see you've got a Fright Night trophy there.
I have one of the original, I think it's steel, Fright Nights. And the reason I have this, because this was this came into the show much later, the Fright Nights in season 4 initially, as the background for Lord Fear, and they were used primarily as the logo for Nightmare from season 4 onwards. But the contestants, the Dungeoneer that won, would receive one of these to share, which I always thought was a bit unfair, but they were expensive. And of course, when I was on the show, it was the Silver Spurs of Squadron. It was not the Fright Night. But what I did is I contacted Broadsword. I was regularly in touch with them anyway, and said, "Oh, can I buy one of these Fright Nights?" And they said, "Oh no, they're very expensive. But if you want one, you can contact Ron Lyon, who is the maker." And yeah, they gave him permission to replicate an official Fright Night, for me. So I paid Ron Lyon, and I was a teenager with not very much money. It was a lot of money, but it was worth it. And this is the only accurate replica of a Fright Night that is exactly the same as the ones created for Broadsword. There are lots of other Ron Lyon statues and sculptures that you see online, but they're not this shape exactly. It might have elements from this, but this was the one created for Nightmare. So this, he was given permission to replicate for me, and yeah, I wanted to have it. It's a little bit rusty now. I should clean it really, but it's amazing.
When people see it who aren't familiar with the show, does it is it a talking point?
Not really. If you saw my house, you'd understand why. My house is full of pumpkins. Every room of, in fact, Rowan, who's in the same office as me, one of the designers that works with me, is laughing because he's going, yeah, that's right. My house is odd things, so no, people wouldn't even notice this. There are far more strange things to comment on in my home.
Facebook user Graham Parkinson would like to know, how did you decide who was going to be the Dungeoneer?
That's an interesting question, because we had decided ourselves beforehand, thinking that we had the right to decide, which we later found out we didn't, that I would be the Dungeoneer. I was the sort of the one that pushed this forwards and wanted it to happen and put the team together and wrote the letter, etc. But when we got there, we were told, when we first met Tim Child in the hotel, because the day that we arrived, we weren't taken to the studio, we were taken to a hotel, and that evening Tim Child came to meet us because he hadn't met us until then. And he brought us Nightmare sweatshirts to give us as a gift. And he explained that he would be deciding who would be the Dungeoneer, which we were surprised at because we kind of made our own mind up. And so we told him that we'd been practicing with me as the Dungeoneer, and he said that he was very happy with that. So that's how that happened.
Awesome. Okay, that's quite interesting. We always just assumed that you got to choose yourself as well.
No, it was very much Tim's decision, and he went along with our decision, but I'm sure if he had disagreed, he would have changed it.
Your team were only the second team to win. Were you made aware at the time that another team had beaten the dungeon before you?
No, we were not made aware of that until afterwards. We were not given any information about anything to do with previous teams or adventures or the dungeon or anything different about it from the first series. It was very covert in that regard. We were kept away from anything that might give us any sort of hint, tip or help. Squealed away into the green room, which in Studio E was upstairs, and at the end, I think it was actually the hospitality suite from when it was used for main shows, and that was our green room where we were kept well away from it. So no, we didn't know that anyone else had won.
Do you think your experience on the set of Nightmare in some way influenced your chosen career path?
100%. Absolutely. My family are not from the world of entertainment. Having said that, some of my ancestors are, if you go back far enough on my mother's side, but my mother was an arts teacher and various other things throughout her life, all sorts of different things. She's still alive, by the way. That made it sound like she wasn't, but she is. And my father worked in the totally different worlds, nothing to do with entertainment. But the experience of being in the television studio for over a week, as we were, a very long time, that summer in Norwich, made me fall in love with the world of television. Now, I had a little bit of an understanding about it because I'd already sort of shown a proclivity towards performance. I was a bit of a performer as a child, but certainly that experience of appearing in Nightmare solidified my thought process towards wanting to work in television. Absolutely, it is the only reason that happened.
If I'd been on the show, it probably would have had the opposite effect for me. I was still at an age where I was still kind of believed what was happening on screen, so I actually thought that they were sending these kids into the dungeon and then killing them and bringing them to life.
I was well aware that the whole thing was a staged fantasy and very much understanding of that.
In my defense, I was 4, so...
Okay, well, you're not quite as old as me.
Can you tell us about a typical day of filming the show?
Sure. So we were put up in different hotels. So the hotel that we had during the week was the Hotel Nelson in Norwich. That's where the team stayed. But at the weekend, if teams were still in the game by Friday afternoon, then they would transfer us to a different hotel for the weekend and then back to the Hotel Nelson on the Monday. And they were very generous. They gave us money and a car so that we could enjoy the weekend and be happy. A typical day would be up relatively early, about 7 o'clock. We had to be in the studio by 9. for makeup and checking continuity on outfits and that sort of thing. And then we would spend the entire day in the green room or in the dungeon. So if we were in the dungeon for a room, because every room was filmed entirely separately with sometimes many hours between each room, even relatively what we perceive to be relatively easy rooms would sometimes take a very long time to set up first. So if we were in the green room, there were various computers to play games, board games, watch films, that kind of thing on VHS, as it was in those days. No such thing as DVDs then. And then we would be whisked into the studio. I would be have my earpiece fitted and the helmet of justice put on in the set with Treguard and the advisors. And then I would be taken away to one of two CK or chroma key voids, because there were various voids for different reasons in the production of the show, but the main void where the Dungeoneer was the biggest one. That was some distance away from the set. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, but I've seen a photograph online where it's next door. Well, that photograph comes from series 1. Series 2 was set up differently in the studio. So the antechamber, the Treguard chamber, was separate from the blue void. So there was a little walk to get to it.
Oh, okay.
Play the game for whatever length of time that was in that room. At which point the stage manager, when the game had finished, would say stop. I suppose instead of saying cut, because it was children, they thought we might not understand that. So the cue was stop, very loud. And that was, I was then taken out by Tom Hunt, the floor manager, or Stephen Sendell, who was the stage manager, back to the anteroom with Treguard and the advisors, have the earpiece and helmet removed, and then we were all whisked off back to the green room until the next room.
You've said in past interviews that since appearing on Nightmare, you've been diagnosed with dyspraxia. How did this affect you with maneuvering around the dungeon and tackling obstacles?
That's interesting. Yes, I have dyspraxia, very, very mildly. So it's not a serious issue by any means, but what it means is that I find it difficult under pressure to determine which is right and left accurately. Now, this is solved very easily by me concentrating very hard, and as long as it's not under pressure, I can correctly identify left and right. But if I have to do it suddenly, I often get it wrong. And this was the same when I was in Nightmare, but we had practiced for many days. And when we were in the hotel in the evenings, we would practice in the garden. So I would walk around various picnic benches or whatever was in the grounds of the hotel, and we would be practicing that to make sure that I was getting left and right correct. And as far as I remember, in all of the rooms in Nightmare, I don't think I went the wrong way. I don't think dyspraxia reared its head. I don't remember going the wrong way at any point. But yeah, it's slightly difficult because I say I have to concentrate very hard on it. But when I do, it's accurate.
How easy was it to buy into the illusion of the dungeon? And did you get scared at any point?
Very, very easy to buy into the illusion because in the moment, it's real. Despite the fact that you know it's not. I suppose I could relate it to the same type of emotion when you're watching a film or a theatre play, that you invest in it so much that you forget you're sitting in a seat in a theatre or in an auditorium for a cinema film, because you're invested in what is being portrayed to you as what's happening and what is real. So you kind of forget that you are just a passive viewer. And in Nightmare, it's similar because you're invested in what's happening. You want to win the game. You want to overcome the challenge. And I was very much a live action, no, not live action, role playing games, not action, I should say. I didn't run around in woods dressed up as an orc, but playing role playing games and that kind of thing. So it was quite easy to get lost in the illusion of it. Did I get scared? Now, here's a funny story. Yes, I did. And only by one thing. And I can't really explain why, but the automatum was what was called in Nightmare speak a hurry up for Dungeoneers, which was a mute character, Clockwork Knight, played by Edmund Den. And it was just supposed to be a mechanical knight that would chase you around out of the room to make you hurry up so that it's not boring for the viewers. And this first time that happened, some of the sounds in Nightmare were live, so they were happening as the program was recorded. Others are put in post-production, so later on. But the sound of the automatum, that sort of whirring and clicking noise, was played live, so I could hear it and sense this thing behind me. And I became really, really wound up by, it's a good word, it's a very clock night, wound up, after the first chamber. And I think the production team realized that this effect had happened and it was good for TV because they made it chase me through the next 3 rooms as well. So each time it happened, I'm genuinely quite frightened of it. I can't really explain why. After the end of level 1 and down the well into level 2, Tim did make a point of coming in to say to me, "You won't meet it again, you know, it's staying in level 1," which was like, so I didn't like that.
Facebook user Joshua Allen wants to know if Nightmare was filmed as live.
Yes, it was. It can only be filmed as live. It is an adventure game where if you make a mistake, it's, you know, that's the end of your adventure, either immediately or soon afterwards. So yes, it is all filmed as live. Having said that, sometimes there were what are called in television pickup shots. So for example, a pickup shot in my adventure would have been when we met a Viking, and there was a scenario which I know you're going to talk about because it's in the questions that you pre-sent me, with the Sorcerer's Stone. And after the room had been filmed, they did a pickup shot of me holding the stone and the Viking sort of going ooh on a close-up of a camera. So little tiny things like that were pickup shots done afterwards. And so occasionally there would be a comment from Traeger that they wanted to add in, so he would record that in the ante-room. For example, when we were in the Scarab room, which has the fire coming out of 2 small ravines, and I was badly directed by my advisors and walked over it, you can hear on the program Traeger saying, "Ouch, you've damaged your life force, Dungeoneer." Well, he didn't say that at the time. That was recorded immediately afterwards so that in post-production they could put it on to make it act. So yeah, there were pickups.
You got quite a bit of help from Folly in level 2. Would you say you were quite lucky there?
I don't think luck necessarily comes down to it, because it's an adventure which is controlled by the games master, which is Tim, the producer. Well, were we lucky? No, I don't consider that we were lucky. We got 3 questions and got 2 right, so we deserved help. And in that scenario, the predetermined help was the actor Alec Westwood as Folly, who would lead us through the next room where we were supposed to pick up on what he'd done and replicate it later on. So I would consider it lucky. I think it was a just reward for 2 out of 3 questions from Merlin.
What attributes do you credit Vaughan, Becca and Mary with that contributed to winning? So like, who was the brightest, who had the coolest head?
Oh, that's difficult. Well, Mary became the spellcaster because she was good at spelling, so she did spells. Vaughan and Becca were good at describing the room and controlling where I would move by giving me the direction. So I would definitely say the whole thing is a combined effort, and certainly not indicate that anyone is brighter than another. I think we were relatively bright children. We were certainly the oddballs at school. We were the nerdy ones who liked games and Nightmare and things like that. So we were slightly perhaps more invested in it than maybe some other people might be, but I wouldn't say that any of them were particularly better than the others. They each had different roles, and we were clear about that, because a lot of Nightmare teams, as you see, they all shout directions at the same time. Well, that's useless to the Dungeoneer. In fact, it can cause death. So we had very clear who's going to describe the room this time, who's going to tell Jason where to go, and who's going to do the spell casting. And collectively, we would try and answer the riddles.
I bet you, when you did go back to school, though, you had major bragging rights.
I don't remember that being the case. What did happen was our school and local press covered it quite a lot, and the school showed the episodes of Nightmare after they'd been broadcast and recorded on VHS to the school during lunchtime. So they opened our lecture theatre and offered people the chance to go and watch us on the show for the episodes that we were on, which I think was 4. It might have been 3, I can't remember. But each week after that, the following Monday, because Nightmare I think was on a Friday, I'm not sure. Well, whatever day it was on, it was after that they would open the lecture theatre and play the episode for other people to watch, which was quite fun.
So are you still in touch with your old team members?
Yes, I'm still in touch with Mary. I recently had contact with Becca and recently had contact with Vaughan, because I was writing a feature about a different broadsword television show a couple of weeks back, which I've written for nightmare.com. They haven't published it yet, but you'll see it shortly, I hope. And as such, I made contact with Vaughan because he was also on the satellite game with me. So the answer is yes, I'm still in contact with all of them.
Which is better, Nightmare or Most Haunted?
How do you quantify better? From my point of view, Nightmare is better than any other television show. Nightmare trumps everything.
So if they did bring Nightmare back, would you like to play a character on it, or maybe even the Dungeon Master?
I would love to do that. My initial training years ago was as an actor before I became a television presenter, and I still do act very occasionally, usually in character roles. The opportunity to be given a chance to be part of any sort of Nightmare in the future would be absolutely amazing. And I'd probably do it for nothing, which I don't say very often.
So if they did bring it back as like say an adult program and had adult contestants, you'd be happy to reprise your previous Dungeoneering experience then?
I wouldn't want to be a Dungeoneer on it. I'd want to be a character in the show and be part of the dungeon. Yes, I'd love to do that, and I think I'd do it really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think you'd be brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
Are there any characters or puzzles from the later seasons that you'd like to have tested yourself against?
Well, the answer to that's difficult, really. Obviously, Nightmare changed and evolved every season throughout its entire history. We were in the dungeon of its time, so its difficulty level, I suppose, was relative to its time and fair for its time. And obviously, it changed in the later years. It became more of a dramatized game and less of a Dungeoneer-based game. It became much more about the drama and less about the puzzles or environments, I think. That's just my opinion. Would I like to face the other puzzles? Well, I'd love to do it again because it was an amazing experience. So if I had been given the opportunity to do it again, yes, I would. And I was given that opportunity with a different show from Broadsword Television.
Did you get to know the actors backstage at all, or were you separated from them to maintain the illusion?
All the contestants or Dungeoneering and advisors are segregated away from the actors, so you don't meet them at all. However, after the recording is finished, yes, we met them and got to talk to them in the Anglia Television canteen, which was on the roof. And of course, because it was summer, it was beautiful sunshine mostly. And so, yes, we got to meet them in half costume, half makeup after we had finished our adventure and speak to them. So yes, we did.
Awesome.
I've made contact with many of them over the years since, actually, and talked to some of them relatively regularly, which is quite nice.
Facebook user Gary Smith wants to know if appearing on the show lived up to your expectations, and did being a Dungeoneer affect your enjoyment of later episodes?
Yes, of course, it lived up to my expectations. It was a positive experience in every way for me, and I loved it. And did it change my enjoyment of later seasons? No, I don't think so. But what it perhaps did was that when you would see something new on Nightmare, I would think, oh, well, they've done that like this because that's what we did, and it's a bit different like that. So you'd be able to sort of work out how it was done, which was interesting. Certainly for me as a teenager growing up, because I moved into television very, very quickly after Nightmare. And in fact, I was involved in Shepperton Film Studios from when I was 16, luckily, which was very nice. So I looked at Nightmare from the point of view of how have they made that, how have they done that? So no, it didn't spoil my experience of watching it ever since, and I still love watching the episodes now.
So after your Nightmare, when you say that you were asked to appear on the satellite game for B Sky B.
Yes.
So I'm assuming you didn't have to audition again.
We did not have to audition again. We received a letter from Broadsword. I think it's maybe a year and a half later. I don't recall exactly how long. And the letter said that they were making a new game show of a similar ilk to Nightmare, but with a science fiction theme for British satellite broadcasting. Nobody knew what that was yet. And it didn't last very long anyway. But no, we did not have to audition again. But the difference was there were only 3 contestants in that program, not 4. So there were 3 mission commanders who sat in the space shuttle to direct the adventure, which was controlling a robot called Larry, lightly armed robotic investigator. And we actually won that show as well, which I think is quite unusual to have won that. They did 38 episodes. I'm not sure how many other people won, if any. Certainly, I haven't seen an episode where another team won, but we won that show too, which was fantastic.
So you're a 2-time Broadsword winner then?
Yes, you could say that. And talking of winning, I've actually got here to show you. This is actually the Silver Spurs of Squiredom that you receive for winning.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nightmare in the early years. It's made of, I think it's made of resin, and it's kind of like, I mean, the Silver Spurs, you might expect them to be spur shaped, but they're not. is kind of three-dimensional medal, if you like, with Anglia Television. So that's what you won in those days.
That's nice. How did your experiences on the satellite game compare to your experiences on Nightmare?
Well, doing the satellite game in some ways was more exciting. Now, that's not to say that Nightmare wasn't exciting, because it absolutely was. But the difference was that with Nightmare, we had watched the first series, so we understood the game. We understood a lot about the show, even though we didn't understand necessarily what we would come up against. Whereas with the satellite game, there was no previous series and indeed no series after it. So you were going in totally blind. So from that regard, it was very exciting and very different, because it's filmed in a totally different way. It's produced in a different way, and it's set in a satellite spinning around in space. So very different to what the Nightmare Dungeon was of its time.
Well, I suppose, plus you personally had the experience of being able to see what was going on this time as well.
Yes, so for me, very different experience. Yeah, totally.
Do you have any other memorabilia from your time on Nightmare?
I have a huge amount of memorabilia from the show Nightmare, but not from my time on it, but from the collections that I have managed to collate over the last 20 years or so. And so I have a massive collection of everything from scripts to meeting notes from Broadsword to sketches of rooms that never happened, and everything else in between. I've managed to create a huge archive, which eventually, when I no longer want to enjoy it, and that won't be for a long time, will be donated to the Museum of Film and Television.
Oh, that's awesome.
One of the reasons I've done this is to collate all this information together to make sure that it's not lost, and that eventually it will go into an archive for future generations to look at if they so wish. It might be forgotten totally by then, who knows? But I think it's nice to preserve the history of the show. One of the other things I managed to get was all of the original cells from the title sequence, which were created by Serial, the cartoon title sequence, the first one that was animated before the Travelling Map Company redid that title sequence in the later shows.
Yeah, the He-Man title sequence, as we call it.
Oh, do you? I've never heard it called that before. But anyway, I have most of the original material that was created, which is paper work, drawings, hand drawings and cells painted by hand. So I've managed to get all of that as well. And as I say, this archive eventually will go to the Museum of Film and Television.
So you've, it's probably fair to say you've probably got the largest collection of Nightmare memorabilia then.
I have no idea. I don't know of anyone else that's got anything really, other than Alan Boyd at nightmare.com. I don't know. So I couldn't answer that. But I've got this. I can show you. This isn't the real one. Before you get excited.
Oh, that's nice.
This is a replica of the Helmet of Justice, and this was made originally by a special effects prop company for Nightmare Live. So when Nightmare Live redesigned their helmet after their first few goes at the show, they commissioned a helmet to be made by this company who no longer exists, and they made two. So they made the one that Nightmare Live used, which has an earpiece in it and stuff, so that they can use it for the show, and this one, which was used as a prize for I can't remember what the competition was, but it was a prize. It's signed by Hugo at the back. And I managed to contact the person who won this prize and buy it from him. So yeah, that is a replica helmet. Not
cool. It definitely beats the one I made out of papier-mâché for Comic-Con.
Yeah, you can wear it. It'll probably mess my hair up, but it does work.
When Mogdred asked you to pledge allegiance to him, were you at all tempted to say yes, just to see what would happen?
No, definitely not. And one of the things that we were told quite a lot throughout the recordings by him was, please talk about decisions you're making. Don't just make them, because it would be very quick otherwise. And it was very obvious that we would say no, but I would say to the advisors, what do you think? So there was some content, because otherwise you'd rush through each room and they wouldn't get us enough minutes on the television schedule that they need. So it was important that even with obvious things that maybe I would just answer myself, that there was a discussion between me and the advisors before a decision was made. But no, we didn't think for a moment that we would pledge allegiance to Mogdred, who incidentally was originally called Mordred in the original notes that I have about the show. He was referred to as Mordred all through series 1, although he never appeared. The series 1 planning states it as Mordred. Obviously, when it got to production, they decided it was Mogdred, and Merlin mentioned Mogdred in series 1, even though you never saw him. But he was originally Mordred, yeah.
So, as you've said, they took great care to keep teams apart so nothing was spoiled. But we do know that some teams were a bit rebellious and managed to pass on secret messages to the next team. Did you manage to garner any advice from the previous team? And did you pass anything on to the next?
Well, you do meet the previous team and the following team in the green room because there's a crossover. Did we gain anything from them? No. I mean, obviously, we were told not to tell each other things. Did we try? Yes. Did we get anything useful? No, absolutely not.
What did you get up to between shoots? So you say they provided you with money and a car and stuff like that.
Yes.
Did they put on any other entertainment?
Well, I think that's enough, really. I mean, we were incredibly surprised and delighted with that. So they gave, I remember how much it was. They gave the chaperone, you have to have a chaperone with you, obviously, one of the parents from one of the team members. So our chaperone could drive, and she was given £60 for the weekend for us to enjoy ourselves, which doesn't sound much nowadays, but in 1988 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
So for £60, we went to the local amusement park, which was on the, where was it? Somewhere on the coast near Norwich. I can't remember exactly where. And we went on the rides and things there. And we went in a walk-through horror show called Sheer Terror. And we went out and had dinner and did lots of fun things with the money. And it was lovely because obviously the hotel was all being paid as well and all the food. So they very much looked after us, and that was really appreciated, even at the young age that we were.
Facebook user Richard Jenner would like to know, did you ever have any inclination that you were part of something that people would still be talking about over 30 years later?
No, absolutely not. All television is ephemeral. Most television is forgotten pretty much after it's broadcast. I suppose it's different nowadays because things go round and round and round on little channels for years in different territories. But did we think that we were part of something that would still be being remembered all these years later? Absolutely not. No.
So what do you think's different about Nightmare that means that it's retained this fan base?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think possibly because it was such a huge show in terms of viewership for its time. And so an awful lot of people of my age group watched it, and younger and a bit older too, watched it and will remember it. And because at that time there were only 4 channels, or 3 maybe, I can't remember when Channel 4 launched, but there were very limited channels. So television was limited, and therefore things that you saw on TV were more perhaps memorable than they are now because there's so much of it, so much choice. Why has it stood the test of time? Maybe because nothing like it has ever happened since on television. There isn't really, I mean, there are various things that people say are similar, but from my point of view, I can't think of a show that really captures the essence of what Nightmare was about. And so from that point of view, it's unique, and maybe that's why it stood the test of time. I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, people keep on telling me that Raven is similar, but all I can see is...
Yeah, I've heard that too. Raven, I've watched it. Raven was a location-based adventure game show, so in that regard, totally different to Nightmare in every way. The effects and the props were real as opposed to chroma key generated, and the host is no patch on Hugo.
No, exactly. But people keep on saying, I think, is it because there's a man with a beard? Is that what makes it similar?
Well, I think that's where the similarity ends.
It's been great talking to you today. Just before we say goodbye, what can we look forward to from you in the future? Do you have any exciting projects coming up at the moment?
Well, yes, I do. And as is normal in television land, I can't tell you about most of them. I can tell you that I recently presented a game show, a location-based game show, nothing like Nightmare, by the way, which is now in the commission process and may or may not ever get on television, but it was really good. I also just appeared on a show for Sky Pick, which we filmed last Saturday. And recently, I've stopped doing it now, but recently I was reading the news on local news program as a news reader. So I've done all kinds of different television things. So yes, there's those things to come. But what's perhaps more interesting to your viewers is that, as I briefly mentioned, I'm in contact and share a friendship which I'm honoured to have with David Rowe, who designed the Nightmare Rooms paintings and the Satellite game as well, and Time Busters. And David and I are engaged in a project which we're calling a Level 4, The Dungeon You Didn't See. And this has been going on for the last year, and it still has a very long way to go. And the project is that some of the original concept for rooms for the dungeon that were created by, the concepts were created by David, so not created by Tim. They were suggestions by David. Well, I managed to get this information in a bundle of ephemera that David had sold to me some years ago, and going through it I found all these ideas for rooms that never happened. And so working with David, he is now creating these rooms in the same style of art by hand that he did the original.
Wow.
He's doing that at the moment, and we're working out how these rooms might have worked in terms of gameplay. And the plan is that eventually, and I don't know when this is going to be, it depends how long the project takes, we will release these rooms in the form of a booklet that you can buy, or if not that way, then by video with me and David talking about them. But we will share them with the wider community once the project is ready to be shared, and it is not at that stage yet.
That's fantastic. I've always had a deep admiration of David Rowe's artwork.
Oh, he's brilliant, and he's as good now as he was then. Absolutely fantastic. And he's the great thing is he's been sourcing, he's moved house in the last few months actually, and he's been sourcing the same equipment in terms of the art equipment, etc., that he used to have for the original dungeon rooms, exactly the same, so that he can be doing them in exactly the same way as he was when he was doing the original art. So this is not a digital project, this is an art project. And yeah, he's really excited about it. And so they do have a place in the history of Nightmare, because they were part of the original concept by David that didn't make it. So they are not sort of something plucked out of now and being made now. They are part of the history. So it is the dungeon you didn't see. And there are some really amazing rooms. There's about 15 of them that are going to be in this project by the end.
Sounds awesome. I'm getting back into retro gaming, and I'm looking back at all these games I used to love as a kid, and I'm only just realizing that David Rowe did like the covers for about 90% of them.
Oh, he was incredibly prevalent, hugely successful artist of computer games covers. And television, as you know, with Nightmare and the Satellite game. He created the look for various parts of the Satellite game. He also painted the original logo for Time Busters, which is another broadsword show. And yes, it's wonderful to be doing this project with him. And like I say, we will share it once it's ready to be shared in whatever capacity that makes sense to do so at the time. And the other thing that we're doing in the project is that David was asked by the production team from Nightmare, by Sally, the director at the time, director of the first few series, to create ideas for Nightmare monsters. And these never made it into the show. And we have that original artwork of these monsters that might have made it into Nightmare. So they'll be shared as well. That's part of this Level 4, the Dungeon You Didn't See project.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been exciting to hear your insight into the making of the show. And
it's wonderful to talk about it. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So thank you very much for asking me.
That's quite all right. So yeah, if you want to come back anytime in the future and talk more Nightmare, just let us know.
Well, when the Level 4 project is ready, we'll come and talk to you all about it. Then maybe we can convince David to come on as well.
Oh, that would be great. Well, thank you very much. We'll hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you so much. And I want to say just before I go, thank you for making the podcast, because when I discovered it, I thought it was wonderful. And I sit in the production office here working on the things that we work on and listen to it. And it's brilliant to go down memory lane. The detail you guys go into is incredible. And I just hope you're quite nice to us when you discuss our team and our decisions. Well, I look forward to hearing what you thought about it anyway, all these years later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's good to talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.